And joining us now to discuss this further is Will Hild, Executive Director at Consumers Research, and Gerard Filitti, Senior Counsel at the Lawfare Project. He's also an attorney specializing in civil rights. Good afternoon to you both. Thank you for joining us. So FCC head Brendan Carr criticized Kimmel's remarks that the suspect in Charlie Kirk's assassination was a MAGA supporter. And Carr has said that this was misleading to the public, right, as we heard earlier, and that broadcasters should operate in the interest of the public. Will, can you dissect for us, break it down? What is Carr talking about?
Certainly. Well, because he was on a broadcast station, the FCC has regulatory power over some of those station affiliates. So the government basically gives licenses for people to broadcast at certain frequencies. And part of the requirement of getting the license to do that is that you act in the public interest. So basically, he's making a reference to the idea that by intentionally misinforming the public, Jimmy Kimmel was violating that rule for the ABC affiliates that aired the show. And so it was sort of a reflection of saying that they were outside of the purview of their license requirements.
So Gerard, can we get your first reactions here as to ABC's move to suspend Kimmel?
Well, I think what's important to remember is that this is ABC's move. It's a private corporation's move. It was not something that was done by the FCC, regardless of what Brendan Carr may have said. The issue ultimately is that this is a private company responsible to shareholders and to the public, making a decision about the quality and nature of the shows that it wants to air. Now, the bigger issue here is whether there was coercion by the part of the government, whether this is the type of speech that we do want the government to be involved with. But ultimately, that's not what played out here. What played out here was a corporate decision on the content of this show based on the comments that were made that many people found offensive and disturbingly so following the assassination of Charlie Kirk.
So, Will, the accusation here is that perhaps Kimmel's comments may have misled the public. I mean, can comedians be held accountable for this, or is this just the nature of comedy?
Well, I think actually that whole framing may not be accurate, because to tell you the truth, there was nothing in what Kimmel said that was even seemingly meant to be funny. There was no joke in it. He just simply made a false statement about what we know, or at least think we know, about who shot Charlie Kirk at this moment. So even outside of whether comedy should be regulated or whether people should bear the brunt of the consequences of making jokes, I just don't think that that's the case here. Jimmy Kimmel was not making a joke. He was making a false political statement, as he has done over and over and over again.
So Will, or Gerard, actually, what do you think about this? This is said within the context of his show, which is, sometimes can be interpreted as a comedy show.
Well, I think that's the problem, that we've moved away from our understanding of comedy shows, and a lot of comedians especially have been using their shows to express political statements, to make political statements, instead of actually doing anything that's remotely funny. And that changes the nature of that from a comedy show to something that is not what's advertised, into a political show, into a statement of fact, into a news show. And that changes the obligation. You can't broadcast knowingly false things and call that news. That has to be something else. But clearly the show is no longer comedy. It's veering away from that. So I think that is an important distinction, to be honest, that the FCC and the FTC can rely on in doing more regulatory work here. But ultimately, the problem is that you should not be expressing false statements on air to begin with.
Okay, Will, can we get your comments on whether freedom of speech is an issue here?
Yeah, I don't think that's the case here. No one would go after Jimmy, I think, on the right, if he was simply making jokes or tongue-in-cheek about a political figure that the right wing appreciates. He's gone after Trump a million times. I'm sure he's made fun of Charlie Kirk before this. The issue, the red line that he crossed here, was not making a joke of a figure that someone on the right appreciates. It was about making material false statements about a highly offensive, obviously very damaging, a violent attack on a human being. And the fact that a lot of the affiliates who purchase Kimmel's show, basically pay money to run it, didn't want to run it anymore. And I think that's one of the things that's getting lost in all this. FCC Chairman Carr may have made comments attacking what Kimmel did, but ultimately the decision was made because consumers, both rank and file retail consumers like you and me, but also the actual purchasers of the show, Sinclair Broadcasting, didn't want to air it anymore because of the offensiveness.
So Gerard, you mentioned a little bit on this earlier, that the FCC cannot solely be responsible for the cancellation of Jimmy Kimmel's show. Can you talk to us about some of the factors that also contributed?
Well, I think the biggest factor that contributed here was that it was not a government decision. The FCC or the FTC, and no government agency, because there are multiple that might have jurisdiction here. No government agency has actually taken action here. This was an entirely corporate decision made to suspend his show indefinitely. So ultimately, this was not government action. Now, we did have the government make a statement, but that statement is open to interpretation. And I think a lot of people have argued over the years that there does need to be a tightening of regulations on some of these shows which portray themselves as comedy, but in fact are making political commentary as truth. So the issue of what regulatory process plays out, that is something that's a valid question. That's something that voters need to decide. That's something the FCC needs to decide. That's something the FTC needs to decide. But ultimately what happened here was not government action. It was a private corporate decision.
So, Will, do you think its ratings, Jimmy Kimmel's show, played a factor into this? The reception from viewers, the audience, was that a factor?
Yeah, I think that was a huge factor here. I think that if Jimmy Kimmel had multiples of the audience that he currently has, which he used to have, I mean, he's been in ratings decline now for over a decade. I think if he was in a much stronger position from a market audience perspective, this probably wouldn't have happened. They probably would have suspended him for some defined period of time, made him apologize, but ultimately he would have been back on the air. To the other commenter's point, this was a business decision. And I think, frankly, ABC is trying to pass the buck and insinuate that this had something to do with FCC action, rather than the fact that they were losing money on a dog show that no one really wanted to watch anymore. That was really what happened here. And the comments of FCC Carr, unfortunately, are allowing them to try and claim that this was a government action. I will just note, by the way, ironically, that last year there was a Supreme Court case where the state of Missouri and some others sued on behalf of their citizens for the fact that the government, even people within the CIA, were putting pressure on certain social media firms to get rid of tweets or ban people that they didn't like for saying things they didn't like about COVID. And ultimately, the Supreme Court decided with the votes of the 3 liberal Supreme Court justices that these people did not have standing because the government is able to influence private actors as long as the statements that they use are sufficiently vague. So ironically, it was the left that was arguing that the statements of people like Chairman Carr were okay in this context just a year ago, less than a year ago. And the Supreme Court found that to be the prevailing argument. So to hear all of these people on the left now claim to be free speech advocates when they were happy to see the CIA and other government parties putting pressure on private social media companies to ban people because of things they didn't like is just really the height of hypocrisy on the left.
Okay, there's actually another topic I wanted to talk to you guys about, but Gerard, can I get a response first before we move on to what Will said?
No, I think that's absolutely right, and it shows the hypocrisy indeed when you're making allegations against the government that have not held up in previous cases. And ultimately, we do have to remember these companies are responsible to their shareholders, they're responsible to the American public, and when you do have declining viewership, as you have done for years, maybe they want to evaluate what they put on the air. We need to go back to the days of Johnny Carson and Jay Leno, not to these political discussions on late night that are incendiary and do more damage to the American public than good.
Okay, Will, 17 state attorney generals are putting public colleges and universities on notice to not discriminately raise security fees against conservative speakers, warning that if they continue down this path, they will be held accountable. The message here is that security policies must be applied to all speakers, regardless of viewpoint, in a neutral manner without bias. So, I mean, this seems fair and reasonable. Do you see any issue with this?
Not at all. This is something that left-wing university bureaucrats have been using to censor and veto conservative speakers on college campuses for over a decade. This is about time that this was finally cracked down on. And frankly, the core job of university staff and administration is to protect the ability for free inquiry to happen on that campus. So if they can't, by definition, if they cannot assure that, and they have to cancel a speaker because they cannot assure that, that should be, in effect, a resignation notice for them as administrators at that school. If you cannot ensure that, that is your core job. You should be fired or removed immediately. And so it is about time. I'm very happy to see what the attorney generals are doing. And this is just basics of running a university, is that you can allow free inquiry from all sides.
Okay, Gerard, your views on the matter.
And it's not just a conservative issue, it's also a minority one. Jewish groups, especially for years, have seen problems getting speakers onto college campuses because of additional security requirements imposed by administrators. Why? Because these administrators allow pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas protests on college campuses, which make the situation dangerous. And then they turn around and deny Jewish students the right to equally participate by imposing higher security costs and additional burdens when they want to bring in speakers to talk about their civil rights. So this is an issue that's not just about conservative voices, but about minority ones as well. And I think these attorney generals are doing the right thing and saying that this will no longer be tolerated.
Okay, Will, I'll just ask you one more thing. And this is the notice by the Attorney General of Iowa. And it reads, you have an obligation to protect free speech. You must not use the burden of protecting free speech to prevent free speech. So, I mean, doesn't raising security costs itself threaten to outprice some speakers? I mean, Will, how should this be handled?
That's exactly right. And I will remind people that this claim of universities that they need additional money from groups bringing speakers comes at a time when university budgets have skyrocketed over the last 40 years. They have outstripped the rate of inflation by sometimes 4x in terms of tuition, right? So the idea that they don't have enough money, for one thing, any university that even has a DEI department and a single DEI staff member, then claiming that they don't have enough money to provide security for any speaker that wants to come and speak peaceably is ridiculous. All those people should be fired first before we're talking about raising security costs. Universities have wasted money on all kinds of superfluous nonsense that's often a complete abrogation of their students' civil rights. They should have enough money left over to provide for their security when they're engaging in free inquiry, the purpose of a university.
Okay, well said. Gerard, final comments here?
And universities are doing it wrong if they're not taking safety considerations first and foremost, especially in light of the aggression that we've seen on college campuses for many years now. So there shouldn't be an afterthought. There shouldn't be an additional burden that's borne by students. Universities need to do a better job imposing consequences when we see academia and students and outsiders come to campus and wage aggressive conduct against students. That's where the universities are failing, and students should not have to bear a higher cost for that.
Okay, great discussion today, Will, Gerard. Appreciate it.
Thank you.